Hello everyone, this is a review video of chapter 39, which will be on exam 3.2. This chapter is very short, but as an added bonus to help you practice these concepts, on Canvas the professor has provided some sample study questions, 20 to be exact, and I've added them to the end of this presentation. So we're going to go over all of the answers together, and I'm going to explain to you how I would approach the questions. So hopefully that will help you get some practice. One key idea that you should get straight going forward is a general animal body plan. So cells form tissues, tissues form organs, and organs form organ systems. So it's just a way of organizing an organism. And this is especially important to understand since we started off talking about, cells and bacteria, unicellular organisms, and then we discussed the origin of tissues. And now we're talking about more of the whole organism, including its tissues and its organs and the functions of its organ systems. So it all just branches out from cells. And with that, we have 4 tissue categories that we talked about. The first is nervous tissue, which is comprised of neurons with a cell body and a nucleus, one or more branching out dendrites, and an axon. So nervous tissue transmits electrical signals, and it also includes support cells called neuroglia. The dendrites are highly branched and short. They carry signals from adjacent cells to the cell body of the neuron, and then the long axons transport the signal from the cell body to other cells. Next, we talked about connective tissues, which are where cells are loosely arranged in a matrix of extracellular fibers. These fibers can vary across the 4 main types that we talked about: bone, adipose tissue, cartilage, and blood. And in the book, it broke it down by loose, dense, supporting, and fluid. With loose connective tissue, you have an array of fibers called fibroblasts in a soft matrix. In dense connective tissue, you have it being collagen fiber dominant for tendons and ligaments. Supporting connective tissue is with the bone and the cartilage. And the fluid connective tissue deals with the blood with an extracellular matrix of plasma. Next, we talked about muscle tissues, which are fibers that can contract. We have skeletal muscles, which are where overlapping proteins are attached to bones, and these cells are long. Cardiac muscles comprise the walls of the heart, where electrical signals travel throughout those heart cells for coordination. So it's very important that the cardiac muscle all contracts and moves at the same time to maintain proper function and efficiency, and these cells are branched. And then we have smooth muscle, which lines the digestive tract and the blood vessels, and these cells are of a tapered shape. Finally, we talked about epithelial tissue, which is many tightly packed cells. 3 key concepts that you should remember about epithelial tissue is that it covers the outside of the body, it lines organs, and it forms glands. For some vocabulary, we have organs, which have specialized functions, and they're comprised of 2 or more tissues. And glands secrete specific molecules such as hormones and enzymes. The cells and epithelial tissues have three primary shapes. Cuboidal cells are square, columnar are rectangular like columns, and squamous are they're kind of irregular, such as the human cheek cells we looked at in lab. And then we can have two classifications for epithelial tissue. Simple epithelial tissue is a single cell layer thick, good for gas diffusion. Stratified epithelial tissue is the opposite. So you have closely packed cells in layers. And then we talked about the polarity of the epithelial tissue, where the apical side faces towards the environment and the basal side faces towards the interior. Since this starts with an A and it faces away, that's how I would remember it. And then I just would try to remember that the basal side faces inwards. Maybe you can say basal towards the body. So this wasn't really talked about in too much detail in class, but there is a link on Canvas. So you just need to be familiar with all of the different systems of the body. And yeah, I had to cover some of the bits with hearts just because YouTube doesn't like showing body parts, even though this is anatomy and I think, explicit. So, but if you want to look at this stuff without me having to censor it, you can find a lot of interesting anatomy guides online, interactive ones, and a lot of this should be familiar. So just go ahead and familiarize yourself with all of these different systems. Another concept that we talked about is ways to increase the surface area, because organisms need to balance a fixed body size with room for gas diffusion, their organs and chemical reactions. So it's all about, as an animal is scaled up in size, the organs have to scale up, and then how do we make sure that the surface area of these organs is going to be efficient for gas diffusion, and also are chemical reactions going to be able to take place efficiently? So we talked about some ways that we can increase the surface area, such as the lamellae and the gills, which are thin sheets of epithelial cells. There are folds in the digestive tract called villi, and then capillaries are branched to increase gas diffusion. And you can find example pictures of these on Canvas and in the book as well. Next is homeostasis. So there's a need to have stability of chemical and physical conditions in cells. So we need to keep the pH, the blood glucose, the electrolytes, and oxygen and carbon dioxide within a certain range so that critical chemical reactions can occur. Every organism is essentially a big chemical factory of all these different reactions, and there are certain things that animals have to maintain so that these reactions can occur, and that they can occur efficiently for what an organism's specific bodily needs are. And when we talk about homeostasis, we're mainly focusing on mammals. So one concept is negative feedback, where there is a sensor sending information to an integrator, which evaluates incoming sensory information to determine the response, and an effector restores internal conditions to set point values. We will see some examples of this in the questions, so I can talk more about those later. There's a need for thermoregulation to maintain the body temperature. Certain processes may vary given the temperature. So certain enzymes may work more efficiently at a higher temperature, and those are very critical. There are 4 methods of heat exchange that we talked about. Conduction is when 2 bodies are in contact. An example is a turtle on a rock. So the turtle is in physical contact with the rock, and the rock's in physical contact with the turtle. Convection is a special case of conduction involving wind or water. Radiation is the transfer between 2 objects not in contact, such as a lizard in the sun. And evaporation is when heat is lost when liquid turns to gas, such as when you sweat. And there's different ways organisms can obtain heat. So endotherms have their heat generated by their metabolism, and then they can retain this heat via insulation. Mammals are endotherms, for example, and they have fur to help keep themselves insulated. In some mammals, we have the concept of countercurrent heat exchange. I think in the book, it gave the example of the whale. So this is where the warm blood in the arteries traveling away from the heart warms incoming cooler blood from the veins. And then on the flip side, we have ectotherms, which have their heat depend on the environment, such as reptiles. And then there's 2 ways we see to maintain body temperature. So homeotherms, such as human beings, have a constant temperature. Poikilotherms, their body temperature can fluctuate with environmental conditions. Again, a good example are reptiles or fish as well. So next are a group of 20 sample study questions. And I put these in here because they're almost exactly what you could expect from the exam. I'm not sure if she's going to provide us with questions for chapters 42 and 46 if we get to it, but if we do, I will definitely add these once I make a final exam review. So if you would not like to go over them with me, if you want to do them on your own, the questions and the answer keys provided on Canvas. Otherwise, I am going to just go through these and try to explain the answers to you. So for each of these, make sure you pause and try to think about it on your own. Or if you're lazy, like I probably would be, you can just listen to me explain it. So the first question is, tissues functioning together make up organs, membranes, organ systems, organelles, or organisms. So pause and think about it. All right, so the answer is A. So tissues functioning together make up organs. So the first thing that I talked about in this video was the animal body plan, where cells, it's cells to tissues, tissues to organs, and organs to organ systems. So that's just how you can answer it. So tissues form organs and organs form organ systems. Yeah, and organelles and organisms. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, like tissues functioning together make up organisms, yeah, because organisms have tissues, and yes, they in a way make up organ systems, but the most correct answer is organs, following the animal body plan. Next, the absorptive epithelia in the gut are considered polarized because E, the apical surface is different from the basal surface. Okay, so the key word here is polarized. And going through these, A, thick and thin filaments are present. If you answered A, I could kind of see thick and thin, kind of opposites, maybe polarized, but that's not quite right. B, they pump waste into the lumen while pumping nutrients toward the blood. Well, this doesn't really have anything to do with polarized. The colors seen on the top and the bottom of the cells are different. We didn't really even talk about that. They must fire action potentials to absorb most nutrients. Again, we didn't really even talk about that. So E, the apical surface is different from the basal surface. The apical side faces towards the environment. Remember I said apical away, and then the basal side, basal towards the body. It's the side facing the interior. Most of the absorption surfaces of multicellular animals are lined with what? Epithelial tissue. So we're talking about what is lined, and the three main functions that I outlined for epithelial tissues were that they cover the outside of the body, they line the organs, and they form glands. So when we talk about absorption surfaces, we're certainly talking about organs. Organs have to absorb nutrients to undergo chemical processes and fulfill their functions. So, and we know that the epithelial tissue lines organs. Which of the following is an example of a connective tissue? C, blood. So you need to remember what connective tissues are. They're cells loosely arranged in a matrix of extracellular fibers. So for A, the surface of the skin covers the body. It's an epithelial tissue. Nerves are part of the nervous tissue. Cuboidal epithelium, again, is part of the epithelial tissue, and smooth muscles are made up of muscle tissue. So we're left with blood, and blood is fluid connective tissue with an extracellular matrix of plasma. A stratified epithelium is composed of multiple layers of cells stacked from the basolateral side to the apical side. So again, we talked about polarity with epithelial tissues. Remember, the basolateral or the basal side faces towards the body. The apical side faces towards the environment, away from the animal, the organism. And then some of these aren't really ones that we talked about. Connective tissues typically have relatively few cells and a large amount of extracellular matrix. So all of these describe different features of the four tissue types. So for A, little space between the membranes of adjacent cells. That was with the epithelial tissues. B, the ability to transmit electrochemical impulses. That was with nervous tissue. The ability to shorten upon stimulation. That was with muscle tissue. So we're talking about connective tissues. We're talking about D. The composition of connective tissue determines its physical properties. If you gently bend your ear and then let go, the shape of your ear will return. This can best be explained by the presence of what tissue type in your ear? B, cartilage with elastic fibers. Now, you may be familiar with what's made up of cartilage in the body, for example, your ear. But some of these you can certainly rule out. Bone, no. A fluid connective tissue. Remember, fluid connective tissue is with blood. And yeah, there's blood in the ear, but it doesn't really contribute to the fact that the ear's shape will return once you bend it and let go. Loose connective tissue is just an array of fibers in a soft matrix. So the key here is really the word elastic, because the shape of the ear bounces back. Blood is best classified as connective tissue because the best answer here is A. its cells are separated from each other by an extracellular matrix. So we're considering in this question why blood is classified as connective tissue. We're not really considering anything else about blood itself. So you have to remember that for something to be a connective tissue, we're talking about cells loosely arranged in an extracellular matrix, and you have your cells spread out. So the best answer and the correct answer here is A. 9, with its abundance of collagen fibers, cartilage is an example of A, connective tissue. Yeah, so we talked about how collagen can be a fiber in the extracellular matrix. So we're talking about dense connective tissue here, where the collagen fiber is dominant. So it's A. In a typical nerve cell, the nucleus is found in the A, cell body. So you have a cell body that includes the nucleus. You have dendrites and axons. So that's the basic structure of the nervous system if we look at it on a small scale. The type of muscle that contains branched cells is B, cardiac muscle. This one you really just have to remember the shape of the different cells in muscle tissue. There's a good picture, I think, in the chapter 39 presentation. One problem that I have with these videos is that the book's information is copywritten. It's got a copyright on it, so I can't really take it and just put it in here because I don't own it. So yeah, but you have access to it. So, and I'm telling you to go look at it. So look at this different pictures of like the skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, and the smooth muscles. And then you might be able to have a better understanding of the shapes of the cells. And let's move on to 11. Food moves along the digestive tract as the result of contractions by smooth muscle. Again, you just got to remember the kinds of muscle tissue and what does what. And this is kind of process of elimination. So cardiac muscle deals with the heart, so not really with the digestive tract at all. Skeletal muscle, again, we're talking about the digestive tract, not the skeletal system. And then C and D, we didn't really talk about these, so they're not really relevant here. But we did talk about smooth muscle, which lines the digestive tract. The body tissue that consists largely of material located outside of cells is connective tissue. So the body tissue, okay. Yeah, so again, this goes back to just the different kinds of connective tissues. You are looking through a microscope at a slide of animal tissue and see a single layer of flat, closely packed cells that cover a surface. This specific tissue is most likely T, epithelial. Okay, so the key here is a single layer of flat, closely packed cells that cover a surface. So, okay, a single layer. Where have I heard of like of us talking about a single layer? That was the simple epithelial tissue. And then flat, closely packed cells, we were talking about how there's very little space in between the cells of epithelial tissues. And then covering a surface. So one of the characteristics of epithelial tissues that it covers a surface. So it's the epithelial tissue. Which of the following structural features of epithelial tissues are related to the function of these cells? So epithelial cells have. Okay, so it is talking about the function of these cells. So you really need to focus on what's relevant to epithelial cells. And we did talk about polarity again with the apical side and the basal side. When the mammalian brain compares the actual temperature of the body to the preferred temperature of the body, which component of a homeostatic control system is being used? So the answer is C, integrator. So we talked about negative feedback where you have a sensor, an integrator, which evaluates incoming sensory information to determine the response. And then you have the effector, which restores the internal conditions. In mammals, a homeostatic system regulates body temperatures through negative feedback, and the hypothalamus can sense cooling and heating, and it responds by altering patterns of electrical signals. I actually want to go back to 14. Actually, no, 13. Okay, yeah. Just wanted to make sure I didn't mix up my answers. Actually, no, I just gave you an answer. So just forget about that. Anyway, 17. Panting by an overheated dog achieves cooling by, and I just gave it to you, evaporation. So with evaporation, I gave you an example of sweat. Essentially, the body temperature is able to decrease when liquid evaporates. 18. Most mammals are strict homeotherms. Elephants allow their body temperature to vary during the hottest parts of the day, meaning they are poikilothermic. It's the key is allowing their body temperature to vary. This refers to being a poikilotherm, where the body temperature can rise and fall based on the environment. And it's different from the concept of being endothermic and ectothermic. So we've got this picture here. The thin horizontal arrows, so these in the figure show that these arrows show that the warmer arterial blood transfers heat to the cooler venous blood. So this concept was when we were talking about, I think it was the example of the whale. Let me go back to show you where it was in the example. Countercurrent heat exchange. When we were talking about obtaining heat, and some mammals and some endotherms, countercurrent heat exchange allows warm blood in the arteries to warm cooler venous blood. And if we go back to question 17, 18, nope, it's 19. So arterial, I can't even say the word, arterial blood is warmer because it's coming directly from the heart, and it's received oxygen. And so blood from the veins is cooler because it's further away from the heart, and it's coming back to be warmed up. So essentially in this concept, the artery and the vein are next to each other, so there's some heat transfer here. And finally, countercurrent heat exchangers, which is what we just talked about, are more useful for endotherms to allow the body's core temperature to remain stable. So it's just a good way of helping with stability of the body temperature in the blood, whether it's in the artery or in the vein. And for some of these other answers, like ectotherms, to permit them to maintain constant body temperature. Well, they don't have constant body temperature because they can't regulate their body temperature. Ectotherms to allow their body temperature to match the environment. Yeah, but in ectotherms, we don't see countercurrent heat exchangers, at least not what we talked about. We're talking about endotherms. Endotherms to allow their extremities to remain at an elevated body temperature in the cold. Well, we're talking about maintaining a constant body temperature, really. Maintaining homeostasis and thermoregulation. So we're not trying to elevate the body temperature. And then for poikilotherms, so they don't really need to have different body temperatures. And it's not really related to the countercurrent heat exchangers. So where we see this concept is with when we're talking about endotherms and helping to maintain stability of the body temperature. And that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording. So have a great day.